Surrounded and her spear broken. Part 1. The jungle moon of Desert 4 was burning. Smoke rose from the crashed transport ship in thick black clouds. The air smelled of plasma fire and death. Captain Yuna pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the ancient temple ruins and tried to control her breathing. She had 4 arms. All of them were shaking. 12 hours ago, she had commanded a squad of 12 soldiers. They were the best scouts in the Galactic Alliance's 7th Division. They had come to Desert 4 to map the old ruins and search for ancient technology. It was supposed to be a simple mission. No enemy activity had been reported in this sector for over a year. The Valkyrie had been waiting for them. The ambush had been perfect. The enemy had hidden in the jungle for days, watching and waiting. When Yuna's squad landed, the Valkyrie attacked from all sides. The fighting had been brutal and fast. One by one, her soldiers had fallen. Now only 3 remained. Yuna looked at her companions. Hannah, her communications officer, was young and scared. Her blue scales had turned pale with fear. She clutched a broken radio in her hands, still trying to send a distress signal, even though she knew no one was coming. Beside her sat Dawn, the squad's engineer. A plasma burn covered half his chest. He was alive, but barely. Every breath he took sounded wet and painful. And then there was Yuna herself. The captain. The leader. The one who was supposed to keep them alive. She had failed. At her feet lay the broken pieces of her crystalline spear. The weapon had been in her family for 3 generations. Her grandmother had carried it in the Liberation Wars. Her mother had used it to defend their homeworld from pirates. And Yuna had carried it across 17 campaigns, through 4 star systems, against enemies that would make most soldiers run in fear. Now it was shattered. The Valkyrie champion had broken it with a single swing of his plasma axe. Yuna had managed to wound him with her sidearm, driving him back, but the damage was done. Her weapon, her heritage, her pride, all of it lay in pieces on the ancient stone floor. She checked her pistol. 14 rounds remained. Outside the ruins, the Valkyrie were gathering. Yuna could hear their war chants echoing through the jungle. The sound was deep and terrible, like stones grinding together. She risked a look around the corner and felt her hearts, all 3 of them, freeze in her chest. There were nearly 200 of them. The Valkyrie were massive creatures. Each one stood over 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in hard black armor made of chitin, like giant insects. Their heads were long and narrow, covered with dozens of small eyes that glowed red in the fading light. They carried weapons that hummed with plasma energy axes, swords, and spears that could cut through Alliance armor like paper. Their commander stood at the front of the army. He was even larger than the others, nearly 9 feet tall. 3 deep scars crossed his face where Yuna's pistol had wounded him. He was pointing at the temple ruins with his plasma axe, giving orders to his warriors. They were preparing for a final assault. "Captain," Hana whispered. Her voice was barely louder than a breath. "The distress beacon has been broadcasting for 6 hours. If anyone was coming, they would be here by now." Yuna closed her eyes. She knew Hana was right. The nearest Alliance outpost was 3 days away at maximum speed. No one had heard their call. No one was coming to save them. They were alone. "Then we make these 14 shots count," Yuna said. She was surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "We take as many of them with us as we can. We die like soldiers." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Even Doan, barely conscious, managed to grip his small sidearm with trembling hands. The Valkyrie commander raised his axe. The war chants stopped. 200 warriors tensed their muscles, ready to charge. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. "This is it," Yuna thought. "This is how I die." And then the sky screamed. The sound was like nothing Yuna had ever heard. It was a roar of fire and thunder that split the air in two. She looked up and saw a streak of flame cutting through the atmosphere. It was not a meteor. It was not a ship. It was something smaller, something falling with purpose and control. It struck the ground between Yuna's position and the Valkyrie line. The impact shook the temple to its foundations. Stone cracked. Dust exploded outward in a massive cloud. Several Valkyrie warriors were thrown off their feet by the shockwave. Their commander stumbled backward, his many eyes wide with shock. For a long moment, no one moved. The dust hung in the air like a curtain, hiding whatever had fallen from the sky. Then a figure emerged from the crater. It was tall, bipedal. It walked on two legs like Yuna did, but it had only 2 arms instead of 4. It wore armor that was battered and burned, covered in scorch marks from atmospheric entry. On the chest plate, barely visible through the damage, was an insignia that Yuna recognized: a blue and green sphere. A planet. Earth. Yun. A felt her breath catch in her throat. She had heard stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories. They were a young species, barely a century into space travel. They were fragile, with soft skin and weak bodies. They lived short lives and died easily. But the stories also said other things, darker things. They said humans were survivors. They said humans did not know when to quit. They said humans had clawed their way to the stars through blood and fire, through endless wars against each other and against their own planet. They said humans were dangerous. The human surveyed the battlefield. His eyes, strange eyes, with only one pupil, each moved from the Valkyrie army to the temple ruins. He saw the broken spear at Yuna's feet. He saw the wounded engineer and the frightened communications officer. He saw the desperation in Yuna's face. Then he looked back at the 200 warriors standing before him. And he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. The smile of someone who had fallen from the sky and decided that if he was going to die, he would take as many enemies with him as possible. The human spoke. His voice was calm, almost cheerful, despite the army before him. Mind if I join the fight? Surrounded and her spear broken. Part 2. His name was Taiho, and he had been falling for 3 days. The cruiser Indomitable had been destroyed without warning. One moment, Taiho had been eating his dinner in the mess hall. The next moment, the ship was breaking apart around him. Explosions tore through the corridors. Crew members screamed as they were pulled into the void of space. The lights went out, and everything became chaos. Taiho had made it to an escape pod by instinct alone. He had crawled through burning hallways and jumped over the bodies of his friends. When he finally sealed the pod's door and launched himself into space, he had looked back just in time to see the Indomitable explode in a ball of white fire. 300 crew members gone in an instant. Taiho did not know what had attacked them. He did not know if anyone else had escaped. All he knew was that he was alone in a tiny pod, drifting through empty space with damaged systems and failing life support. For 2 days, he had floated in silence. He had rationed his water and ignored his hunger. He had repaired what he could and prayed for what he could not. When his sensors detected a moon with a breathable atmosphere, he had aimed his pod toward it without hesitation. The entry had been rough. His heat shields had burned away too quickly. His navigation systems had failed. He had manually adjusted his descent 17 times, fighting against gravity and fire, trying to guide his tiny pod toward the only sign of life on the moon's surface, a distress beacon. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. Taiho had made his decision. He would land near the beacon. He would find whoever was sending the signal. He would help them if he could, or he would die trying. Now he stood in a crater of his own making. His armor was damaged. His weapons were gone lost somewhere during the violent descent. Every bone in his body ached from the impact. His head was pounding. His vision was blurry, and there were 200 alien warriors staring at him with murder in their eyes. The Valkyrie were unlike anything Taiho had ever seen. They were massive, towering over him by several feet. Their bodies were covered in hard black shells that looked like natural armor. Their heads were long and strange, covered with clusters of small red eyes that tracked his every movement. They held weapons that glowed with energy plasma weapons. Taiho realized. One hit from those would cut through his damaged armor like it was made of paper. Behind him, hiding in the ruins of an old temple, were 3 aliens of a different kind. They were smaller than the Valkyrie, closer to human size. One of them, a female with silver-white fur and 4 arms, was staring at him with an expression he recognized instantly. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. She had been fighting alone. She had been ready to die. And now a stranger had fallen from the sky, and she was hoping, against all logic and reason, that he might change something. Taiho knew that feeling. He had felt it himself, 3 years ago, on a colony world far from here. The Valkyrie commander stepped forward. He was enormous, even by his species standards. 3 fresh wounds crossed his face, still bleeding green blood. His voice was deep and harsh, speaking in broken galactic common. "Human," the commander growled. "You fall from sky to die with prey." "Foolish." Taiho rolled his shoulders. His combat suit was damaged, but it still worked. His rifle had been lost in the crash. His sidearm was empty. All he had was his combat knife, his training, and 23 years of learning how to survive. "I've had worse odds," Taiho said. The commander laughed. The sound was ugly, like rocks scraping together. 200 warriors. "You have nothing." Taiho looked around the battlefield. His eyes found the broken pieces of a crystalline spear lying near the temple entrance. One piece was nearly 2 feet long, sharp, and solid. He walked toward it, ignoring the eyes of 200 enemies tracking his movement, and picked it up. He tested the weight in his hand. It was good. It would do. "I have this," Taiho said. "And I have a really, really bad day I need to take out on someone." The first Valkyrie charged. It happened faster than Yuna could follow. The warrior rushed at the human with a plasma blade raised high, ready to cut him in half. The human did not run. He did not dodge. He stepped forward into the attack and moved. The crystal shard caught the plasma blade and deflected it to the side. In the same motion, the human drove his knee into the warrior's chest. The sound of breaking chitin was like a gunshot. The Valkyrie collapsed, and the human was already moving to the next enemy. 3 more warriors attacked together. The human ducked under the first swing, grabbed the second attacker's arm, and used the warrior's own body as a shield against the third. While the enemies stumbled into each other, the human struck once, twice, 3 times with the crystal shard. Each strike found a gap in the chitin armor. Each strike drew blood. 4 more enemies fell. Then 5. Then 6. Yuna watched in disbelief. She had fought many species in her career. She had seen warriors of great skill and power. But she had never seen anything like this. The human fought without elegance. There was no grace in his movements, no beauty in his technique. He fought like an animal, brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. He used every part of his body as a weapon. His fists, his elbows, his knees, his head. When the crystal shard cut open a warrior's throat, he did not pause to watch the body fall. He was already moving, already attacking, already killing. Within 60 seconds, 8 Valkyrie lay dead or dying in the dirt. The human was not unscathed. Green blood, the blood of his enemies, covered his armor and face. But there was red blood, too, leaking from a dozen cuts across his arms and body. A plasma blade had grazed his shoulder. A claw had torn his cheek. His breathing was heavy, and his hands were shaking, but he was smiling. Still smiling. That same wild, dangerous smile. Well, the human called back to Yuna. His voice was rough but cheerful. You going to help, or just watch? The Valkyrie commander roared in fury. His warriors had frozen in shock, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. One human. One small, fragile human. And 8 of their finest warriors were dead. Kill him. The commander screamed. Kill them all. The army surged forward, and Yuna made her choice. She had 14 rounds in her pistol. The human had already killed 8 enemies. That left 192 warriors against 2 fighters. Impossible odds. But the human was right. If she was going to die, she would die fighting. She would not cower behind these ruins, waiting for the end. She would stand beside this strange warrior who had fallen from the sky, and she would make her enemies pay for every inch of ground. Yuna gripped her pistol and jumped over the wall. She landed beside the human, her 4 arms ready for combat. I am Captain Yuna of the Galactic Alliance, she said. The human glanced at her. Despite the blood and the chaos and the army rushing toward them, his eyes were calm. Sergeant Taiho, United Earth Defense Force, he replied. Nice to meet you. The Valkyrie reached them, and the real battle began. Surrounded and her spear broken. Part 3. The battle became a blur of blood and fire. Yuna moved through the chaos with cold precision. Every shot from her pistol found its target. She aimed for the gaps in the Valkyrie armor, the joints, the throat, the clusters of eyes. Each pull of the trigger meant 1 less enemy. Each falling body meant 1 more second of survival. Beside her, Taiho fought like a demon from old stories. The human had no technique that Yuna could recognize. He did not fight like the warriors of her people, with careful forms and measured strikes. He did not fight like the Valkyrie, with raw power and brute strength. He fought like something wild. Something that had been pushed into a corner and decided that the only way out was through. A conwis. Valkyrie swung a plasma axe at his head. Taiho ducked under the blow and drove the crystal shard into the warrior's knee. As the enemy fell, Taiho grabbed his axe and used it to block another attack. The plasma weapon was too heavy for him, too large for human hands, but he used it anyway. He swung it in wide arcs, forcing the enemies back, creating space. 3 warriors rushed him at once. Taiho threw the axe at the first one, catching him in the chest. The second one he met with his bare hands, grabbing the creature's weapon arm and twisting until the joint broke with a horrible crack. The third one he headbutted, slamming his forehead into the Valkyrie's face with enough force to shatter several of its eyes. How many is that? Taiho shouted over the noise of battle. Yuna fired 2 more shots. 2 more enemies fell. I lost count. Me too. The human laughed. Actually laughed in the middle of a fight for his life. I think we're winning. They were not winning. Yuna knew this. For every enemy they killed, 5 more took its place. The Valkyrie were endless, an ocean of black chitin and red eyes pressing in from all sides. Her pistol clicked empty, and she threw it at the nearest warrior's face before drawing her ceremonial knife. The blade was small, meant for ritual purposes rather than real combat. But it was sharp, and it was all she had. A Valkyrie lunged at her with a spear. Yuna sidestepped the thrust and slashed across the warrior's throat with her knife. Green blood sprayed across her fur. Before the body hit the ground, she was already moving, using her 4 arms to grab the spear and drive it into another enemy. She had never fought like this before. In all her years of service, in all her 17 campaigns, she had never felt so alive. Her blood was on fire. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, but she did not stop. She could not stop. To stop was to die. And strangely, impossibly, She did not want to die anymore. The human had changed something. His presence, his wild energy, his refusal to accept defeat, it had infected her somehow. She found herself matching his madness, throwing herself into the fight with the same reckless abandon. They fought back to back now, covering each other's blind spots. When a warrior came at Yuna from behind, Taiho's knife found its throat. When an axe swung toward Taiho's exposed side, Yuna's spear blocked the blow. They moved together like they had trained together for years, anticipating each other's movements without words. The crystal shard finally shattered after the 15th kill. Taiho did not even pause. He ripped a blade from a fallen warrior's grip and kept fighting. When that blade broke, he picked up another. When his hands became too swollen and bloody to hold anything, he used his elbows and knees. A plasma blade caught him across the back. Yuna heard him grunt in pain, saw him stumble for just a moment. But he did not fall. He turned, grabbed the warrior who had wounded him, and threw the creature into 3 of its allies with strength that seemed impossible for his small frame. "Taiho," Yuna called out. "You're hurt." "I know," he shouted back. "Don't worry about it." But she could see the blood now. Red blood, human blood, mixing with the green of their enemies. His movements were slowing. His breathing was becoming ragged. The smile was still on his face, but it was strained, held in place by will alone. They were both dying. Slowly wound by wound, they were dying. And yet the Vakari were hesitating. Yuna noticed it first. The warriors at the front of the line were no longer rushing forward with the same eagerness. They were watching, waiting. Fear was spreading through their ranks like a disease. The battlefield was covered with bodies. Dozens of Vakari lay dead or dying, their green blood soaking into the ancient stones. Some were missing limbs. Some had been beaten so badly they were barely recognizable. And in the center of all this carnage stood 2 figures, a silver-furred alien with 4 arms and a blood-soaked human with a broken body but unbroken spirit. The Vakari commander pushed through his warriors. His face was twisted with fury, but there was something else in his many eyes. Something that looked almost like doubt. "Impossible," he growled. "You are insects. You should be dead." Taiho spat blood onto the ground. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Sorry to disappoint you. You cannot win. Even if you kill 100 more, you cannot win. We will bury you under our bodies. Then we'll climb back up," Taiho said. "And we'll keep fighting until there's no one left to fight." The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the bodies of his fallen warriors. 43 dead. 43 of his best fighters, killed by 2 exhausted, wounded enemies who had nothing but their bare hands and borrowed weapons. The Vakari were a proud species. They believed in strength and power. They believed that victory belonged to the strong, but they also believed in reading the tide of battle. They knew when a fight had turned against them. They knew when an enemy was too dangerous to underestimate. "Retreat," the commander said. The words spread through the army like a shockwave. Warriors looked at each other in confusion. Retreat? From 2 wounded survivors? "Retreat," the commander roared. "Fall back to the jungle. We regroup and return with greater numbers." The Vakari began to pull back. Slowly at first, then faster. They melted into the jungle like shadows, leaving behind only their dead and the 2 defenders who had refused to die. Taiho watched them go. For a moment, his smile returned, that wild, dangerous smile. "Come back," he shouted after them. "I'm not done yet." And then his legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed. Yuna caught him before he hit the ground. Up close, she could see how badly hurt he was. Burns, cuts, a dislocated shoulder that he must have popped back into place during the fight without making a sound. His armor was in pieces. His body was a map of wounds, but he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. "Hannah!" Yuna called toward the temple ruins. "Medical kit, now!" She looked down at the human in her arms. His eyes were closed, but his chest was still rising and falling. His breathing was weak but steady. He had done the impossible. He had stood against 200 warriors and made them run. He had fought beside her when he could have hidden, bled beside her when he could have fled. She did not understand humans. She had heard stories about them, but stories could not capture this. Stories could not explain the madness she had just witnessed, the stubborn refusal to die, the wild joy of battle in his eyes. But she understood one thing now. The stories were not exaggerated. If anything, they did not go far enough. Surrounded and her spear broken, Part 4, Taiho woke to pain. Every part of his body hurt. His back burned where the plasma blade had cut him. His hands throbbed from the countless punches he had thrown. His shoulder ached from being torn out of its socket and forced back in. His head felt like someone had filled it with broken glass and shaken it, but he was alive. He opened his eyes slowly. The light was dim. The twin suns of HFY were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was lying on a blanket of some kind, propped up against a stone wall. Medical patches covered his chest and arms, stopping the bleeding from his worst wounds. Sitting beside him, keeping watch over the jungle, was Yuna. The alien captain looked almost as bad as he felt. Her silver-white fur was matted with dried blood, both green and red. Cuts and burns marked her arms and face. One of her 4 hands was wrapped in bandages, but her eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "You're awake," she said without looking at him. Unfortunately, Taiho tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded through his back, and he fell back against the wall with a grunt. "How long was I out?" 3 hours. Yuna finally turned to look at him. Her eyes large and golden, with pupils shaped like stars, studied his face. "You should be dead. The wounds you have. My species would have died from half of them." Taiho managed a weak smile. "Humans are stubborn. That is one word for it." She handed him a canteen of water. "Drink. You need fluids." He took the canteen and drank deeply. The water was warm and tasted slightly metallic, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. When he finished, he felt slightly more alive. "The Vekari?" he asked. "They retreated into the jungle, but they will be back." Yuna's voice was calm, but Taiho could hear the tension underneath. "They will call for reinforcements. When they return, there will be even more of them." Taiho nodded slowly. He had expected as much. "Then we need to move. Find better ground. Somewhere we can defend. You can barely stand. I'll manage." He met her eyes. "I always manage." For a long moment, Yuna just looked at him. There was something in her expression that Taiho could not quite read: respect, maybe, or confusion. "Perhaps both. Why did you help us?" she asked finally. "The truth. You could have stayed hidden. Let them take us. You would have survived." Taiho was quiet for a moment. He stared at the darkening sky, watching the first stars appear. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. 3 years ago, my squad was ambushed on a colony world called New Haven. 15 of us, caught in an enemy trap. We were pinned down with no support, no extraction, no hope. We fought for 9 hours. He paused. The memories were painful, even after all this time. 2 of us made it out. Me and my sergeant, a woman named Jisoo. She carried me on her back for 6 miles through enemy territory with 2 bullets in her gut. She saved my life. What happened to her? Yuna asked quietly. She died 3 days later. The wounds were too severe. Taiho closed his eyes. Before she died, she told me something. She said the worst thing in the universe isn't dying in a fight. It's dying alone, knowing that no one came, knowing that no one cared enough to try. He opened his eyes and looked at Yuna. When I saw your beacon, when I saw you outnumbered and surrounded, I couldn't just fall somewhere else. I couldn't let you die alone. Not when I could help. Yuna was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion she was trying to hide. Among my people, we have a word for this, Korathan. It means the debt of the saved. When someone saves your life, you carry a piece of them with you forever. Their courage becomes your courage. Their sacrifice becomes your purpose. That's a beautiful idea. It is a heavy one. She touched the shaft of a broken spear piece. Lying beside her, the largest remaining fragment of her family weapon. This spear was carried by my grandmother in the Liberation Wars. She died defending a city of strangers who were not her people. My mother carried it when she saved a transport ship from pirates. She gave her arm to protect those passengers. And you? I thought I would die today, carrying nothing but 14 bullets and a broken heritage. She looked at Taiho. Instead, I found a human who fell from the sky and asked to join my fight. Perhaps that is my Korathan. Perhaps you are the purpose I was meant to find. Taiho did not know what to say. He had never thought of himself as anyone's purpose. He was just a soldier, doing what soldiers did. But something about Yuna's words touched him in a way he had not expected. Then we survive together, he said finally. And we make sure this isn't the end of either of our stories. A sound from behind them made both of them turn. Hannah, the young communications officer, was approaching with a nervous expression. Captain, she said, Dawan is awake. He's stable, but he won't be able to fight. That's fine, Taiho said. He shouldn't have to. He began to push himself to his feet, ignoring the protests of his wounded body. How far is the nearest defensible position? Yuna rose beside him. There is a rocky outcropping about 2 miles north. Higher ground, natural choke points. If we can reach it before the Vakari return, then let's move. Taiho took an experimental step. His legs were shaky, but they held. Every minute we stay here is a minute we waste. They gathered what supplies they could find, scavenged weapons from the fallen Vakari, medical supplies from the crashed transport, food and water for the journey. Dawan was able to walk with support, leaning on Hannah's shoulder. His breathing was still rough, but his eyes were clear. I heard what happened, the engineer said to Taiho as they prepared to leave. You killed 43 of them. By yourself. 47, Yuna corrected. Some of my kills were assists. He weakened them first. Dawan shook his head in disbelief. That's not possible. You're just one human. Taiho shrugged, then winced at the pain the motion caused. Humans don't really believe in possible or impossible. We just believe in trying. They moved through the jungle as the twin suns set and darkness fell. The night air was thick and humid, filled with the sounds of alien insects and distant animal calls. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy. Every rustle of leaves made them freeze and reach for their weapons. But the Vakari did not come. Not yet. They reached the rocky outcropping just as the first moon rose. It was a good position, high ground with clear sight lines in all directions. Natural rock formations created narrow passages that would force attackers to come at them in small groups, rather than overwhelming waves. This is where we make our stand, Yuna said. When they come again, we'll be ready. Taiho looked out at the jungle below. Somewhere out there, the Vakari were gathering. They would return with more warriors, more weapons, more fury. The next battle would be even harder than the last. But for now, they were alive. They were together. And they would not face the darkness alone. Get some rest, Taiho said to the others. I'll take first watch. Yuna shook her head. We'll watch together. I do not think either of us will sleep tonight. She was right. So they sat side by side on the highest rock, watching the stars come out, waiting for the dawn that might never come. And in that quiet moment, something passed between them. Not words, not promises, just an understanding. A connection forged in blood and fire and survival. They were soldiers from different worlds, different species, different lives. But tonight they were something more. They were allies. They were friends. And tomorrow, whatever it brought, they would face it together. Surrounded and her spear broken. Part 5. The Valkyrie returned at dawn. Yuna saw them first, a dark wave moving through the jungle below the rocky outcropping. Them first, a dark wave moving through the jungle below the rocky outcropping. She counted silently, her 3 hearts sinking with every number. This was not the same force they had faced before. This was something far worse. 600 warriors. The Valkyrie commander had called in every soldier in the sector. He had gathered an army large enough to crush a small city, all to destroy 4 survivors who had dared to humiliate him. Wow, Taiho said quietly, standing beside her. That's a lot of them. He was doing better than the night before, but not by much. The medical patches had stopped his bleeding, but his wounds were far from healed. He moved stiffly, and his face was pale beneath the dry blood that still marked his skin. Beside them, Hana clutched a plasma rifle she had taken from a fallen enemy. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set with determination. Dohan sat against a rock, too weak to stand but holding a pistol in his lap, ready to fight to the end. How many shots do we have? Yuna asked. Taiho checked his weapon. 12 rounds in this rifle, plus my knife. I have 8, Hana said. 4. Dohan added weakly. 20-4 rounds against 600 warriors. Yuna almost laughed at the absurdity of it. It's been an honor, Hana said. Her voice trembled, but she did not cry. Fighting with all of you. It's been an honor. Yuna placed a hand on the young officer's shoulder. The honor is mine. Then she looked at Taiho. Human, Taiho, whatever happens next, thank you for not letting us die alone. Taiho grinned. That same wild, defiant grin he had worn when facing 200 warriors. Who says we're dying? Before Yuna could respond, the Valkyrie charged. The first wave reached the narrow passages of the rock formation and was met with concentrated fire. Yuna and Taiho shot with precision, making every round count. Bodies fell. Green blood splashed against stone. But for every warrior that died, 5 more took their place. The passages held for longer than Yuna expected. The rocky terrain forced the Valkyrie to attack in small groups, just as she had hoped. Taiho met them with his knife when they got too close, fighting with the same brutal efficiency he had shown before. But he was slower now, weaker. Each movement cost him more than the last. A plasma blade caught Hana's arm, and she screamed in pain. Dohan fired his last round and collapsed backward, exhausted. The defenders were being pushed back, step by step, toward the highest point of the outcropping. There was nowhere left to run. The Valkyrie commander pushed through his warriors. His scarred face was twisted with triumph. Now you die, he growled. Now you pay for humiliating me. Taiho stepped forward, putting himself between the commander and the others. His knife was in his hand. His body was broken, his strength nearly gone. But his eyes were still defiant, still unafraid. Come on then, he said. Let's finish this. The commander raised his plasma axe. And then the sky opened. The first drop pod hit the Valkyrie line like a thunderbolt. It slammed into the packed warriors at incredible speed, crushing a dozen of them instantly. Before the dust could settle, armored figures poured out, weapons blazing. More pods fell. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. They screamed through the atmosphere like meteors, painting the dawn sky with trails of fire. Each one struck the enemy formation with devastating force. Each one released more humans in full combat armor, carrying weapons that made the Vakari plasma guns look like toys. What? Yuna breathed. She could not believe what she was seeing. What is this? Taiho started to laugh. Not the wild laugh of battle, but something different. Something that sounded almost like relief. Like joy. That, he said, is my people. A final drop pod landed on the highest point of the outcropping, just yards away from where the survivors stood. Its door hissed open, and a woman stepped out. She was older than Taiho, with black hair streaked with gray and a face hardened by decades of war. Her armor bore the insignia of a colonel, and her eyes swept the battlefield with the calm assessment of a veteran commander. This is Colonel Myray of the United Earth Defense Force Cruiser Retribution. Her voice boomed through her suit's speakers. We received Sergeant Taiho's emergency locator beacon 43 hours ago. We came as fast as we could. She spotted Taiho among the defenders and allowed herself a small smile. You look like hell, Sergeant. Good to see you too, Colonel, Taiho replied. I was starting to think no one was coming. We're humans. We always come. She turned to look at the battle below. The Vakari were in chaos. Caught between the drop pod soldiers and the original defenders, they were being cut apart from all sides. Their commander was screaming orders, but no one was listening. Surrender or die. Murray's voice echoed across the battlefield. You have 10 seconds to choose. The Vakari commander made his choice. He charged at the nearest human soldier with his plasma axe raised. He died before he took 3 steps, cut down by concentrated fire from 6 different directions. After that, the battle was over quickly. Some Vakari tried to flee into the jungle. Others threw down their weapons and fell to their knees. The humans moved through them with professional efficiency, securing prisoners and neutralizing threats. Within 20 minutes, 600 warriors had been defeated. Colonel Myray approached the rocky outcropping where Yuna and her companions still stood, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Captain Yuna of the Galactic Alliance? The colonel asked. Yuna straightened her back despite her exhaustion. Yes, my government will want to speak with yours. Murray's voice was formal, but not unfriendly. Today marks the first official contact between humanity and your alliance. And from what Sergeant Taiho has told me in his emergency reports, we have much to discuss, including mutual defense agreements. Yuna looked at Taiho. The human was swaying on his feet, barely able to stand. But he met her eyes and gave her a small nod of encouragement. I think, Yuna said slowly, that would be acceptable. 3 months later, the Treaty of Thesserfor was signed. The ceremony was held in a grand hall on the Alliance capital world. Diplomats from a dozen species filled the room, tall and short, scaled and furred, beings of every shape and color. And among them, for the first time in galactic history, walked humans. Yuna stood at the front of the Alliance delegation. A new crystalline spear hung at her side, a gift from her family, forged to replace the one she had lost. It was beautiful, but somehow it did not feel as heavy as the old one. Perhaps because she had earned a new heritage. A new story. Beside her, wearing a freshly pressed uniform and a medal he kept insisting he did not deserve, stood Taiho. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. This treaty will change the galaxy. Good changes, I hope. Time will tell. She paused, turning to look at him. Taiho, I never properly thanked you. For falling from the sky. For asking to join my fight. He shrugged, but his eyes were warm. You would have done the same, would I? Yeah, He smiled, not the wild battle grin, but something gentler. Something real. I think you would. The great doors opened. Ambassadors and officials filed in, preparing for the signing that would bind their peoples together. Humans walked among aliens as equals for the first time, their presence a promise of what was to come. Una touched the shaft of her new spear. It was whole again, just as she was. Perhaps, she said, that is what this treaty should represent. Not just alliance, but a promise. A promise that none of us will ever have to fight alone again. Tyo nodded. I can live with that. Together, they walked toward the signing table. Outside, the stars shone bright against the endless void. The same stars that had watched a human fall from the sky to save a stranger. The same stars that had witnessed the birth of something new in the vast darkness between worlds. Humanity had found that they were not alone. They had found others who fought against the night, others who refused to surrender, others who believed that some things were worth dying for. And when they found those others surrounded and outnumbered, they did what humans had always done. They joined the fight.